You're listening to the FM Podcast.
Welcome back to the FM Podcast, episode 11, with me, your host, Brian Neff. I mentioned in the last episode the pieces of the pie concept, and I gave a brief description of it, and I promised I would devote an entire episode to it. Well, the wait is over, because that is this episode. Today we're going to go over pieces of the pie. Quick little overview of today's content. We're going to start with my introduction to the concept, and we'll go over the micro application, and then we'll finish it up with the macro application. Before we get started, though, a quick little primer or explanation of what the piece of the pie concept is. And I don't mean an exact explanation of what it is, because that's what we're going to get into, but essentially what kind of a tool this is and how is it going to help you. I would argue the piece of the pie is a dual purpose tool. Which is what makes it so valuable. For one, it's a mindset tool. Piece of the pie aims to prevent you from getting tunnel vision and losing sight of the big picture. Two, piece of the pie serves as an organization and time/planning tool. Think of it as a microscope. I can look at a macro level of, say, like an entire cell, but I can zoom in and I can focus on like individual cell organs, like a mitochondria, for example. Nerd shit. Like that? Plenty more. Anyway, so the zoom in, zoom out ability is essential for long-term progress and success. We need to be able to look at the macro, the big picture, to make sure the train is still on the tracks, to keep the ship sailing in the direction that we need it to be going. The macro versus the micro is an important dichotomy that will require constant balancing during our lifetimes. If I only think about the macro, I'm not checking the individual parts to make sure that they're working properly. You're not paying attention to like those individual areas that may need improvement or that might be close to breaking. Similarly, if you get consumed by the micro, not only will you neglect all the important areas that need attention, so like if I'm focusing on the mitochondria, I'm not focusing on the ribosomes, I'm only focusing on that. So if the ribosomes get out of whack, I'm not even going to notice. Again, told you there'd be plenty of nerd humor in here. Anyway, fucking nerd. Anyway, more importantly, right, if you're not driving this car, going back to our, macro ship sailing reference metaphor, if you're not paying attention to driving the car, you're sitting there fiddling with the gas pedal or something like that, you're not really noticing that you're wandering over the yellow line into oncoming traffic during rush hour. So, again, needless to say, I think this is a very valuable tool, hence why I'm sharing it with you. So let's go ahead and get into it. I may have been introduced to this like piece of the pie concept earlier than the instance I'm about to go over, and it might go by a different name for other people, but as far as I'm concerned, the concept and its name can be attributed to an SRT trainer I had by the name of Art. A couple things about Art. Art was, a smaller guy. He was a PT stud, just, smaller in stature and like leaner guy. Very goofy, funny guy. What I mean to say is he was very unassuming. However, Art is probably one of the baddest motherfuckers I've ever had the privilege to meet or train under. And Art was a big influence for me while I was working in the tactical space. So considering Art's history as a reconnaissance Marine, his personal affinity for all things tactical and counter bad guy, as well as a penchant for outrageous bathroom humor, Art had a lot to offer us and had great delivery methods to not only keep our attention, do long stretches of death by PowerPoint, but also to ensure that we retained all the info. It's funny how when you relate everything to dick humor, young men will somehow retain that info for the rest of their lives. So that's Art. He's the shit. I'm pretty pro Art. At any rate, I always remember Art going on about pieces of the pie. And essentially in his eyes, he would rather take a jack of all trades and a master of none than a guy who was the best at one thing but sucked at everything else. his sentiment, which I 100% agree with and am a proponent of, is that it's better to be pretty damn good at a lot of things than to be the best of the best at one thing. And why is that? To be a tactical operator like Art, you need to have a diverse set of skills. Missions change, equipment changes, environments change, rules of engagement and tactics change, your team changes. The name of the game is versatility. Don't get it twisted. These high level operators that come from the special operations community might self identify as knuckle draggers, but that's far from the truth. The levels of technical abilities that these guys have in such a wide range of areas means that they're a far cry from these window liquor facades that some of these guys like to put on. It's all about modesty for most of these guys. But anyway, these guys are some of the smartest guys I've ever met. They might not be, Stephen Hawking and can tell you about physics, although I'm sure some of them can. But these guys are very, very intelligent, and they know a lot of stuff about a lot of things. Anyway, the thing about choosing a jack of all trades over a legit master is the time investment required to be each one of those things. Big picture, I can invest 20% of my time and get 80% proficiency in a skill set. The other 20% of that proficiency required to get me to 100% in order to reach that master level is going to require the other 80% of my time, right? So I'm going to get, 70, 80% of the benefit for 15 to 20% of the time, and that extra 20 to 30% required to really make yourself a cut above and be known as a master is going to consume the other 70 to 80% of your time. It's just, if you've ever moved out of a house, what takes the longest time, right? It's not the moving your furniture out. It's like the last, when you think everything's moving and you're getting all the little shit out, right? Because that's essentially what it is. You're refining all the little shit, and that takes 80% of your time. And really, it comes down to bang for your buck. For 60, 70% of my time, right, I can be pretty damn good at three things, right? So if I can spend 20% of my time doing this, 20% of my time doing this, 20% of my time doing this, and I can be pretty freaking good at three different things. It's significantly better than the average person anyway. Or I could spend 100% of my time getting good at just one thing, and then I'll be the best person in that area, but I will be, average at best in others. Now, the world does need those subject matter experts who are the best of the best in their respective fields. However, for these like pipe-hitting operators and the average Joes like me and you, it's better to be pretty damn good at a lot of things to ensure that all your bases are covered. Here's some examples to kind of illustrate this, or scenarios to help illustrate this. So, 3 scenarios. You're the hot shit shooter guy. And you spend the majority of your training time at the range, and you're shaving like 0.02 seconds off your split times, and you're tightening up your five ring groups, your shooting groups by like half an inch. Or scenario number 2, you're the PT stud. You spend your time at the gym. You're shaving like 10 seconds off your mile time, or you're shaving like a tenth of a second off your 40-yard dash, or you're getting 5% better at your Olympic lift PRs. Or 3, you're the guy and you're focused on tactics and strategy, and you spend your training time with your nose in the books, doing dry runs in the shoe house to ensure that every single little footstep matches perfectly with the team tactic. Of these 3 guys, who do you want to be? Which one is the best? Who has the best approach out of those? The shooter guy, the PT guy, or the tactics guy? I'm going to argue that none of them are the best. And here's why. Hot shit shooter guy. What good is your shooting prowess that's, fractionally better and functionally identical to everyone else if the team is going to have to carry your huffing ass up the hill to the objective because you didn't do any PT, right? PT guy, what good is your 3-mile run time if the slowest person on the team is 5 minutes slower? You can't just leave the team. And even if you did get there early, it really wouldn't matter because you're going to have to take time out so the team can explain the tactic to you because you spent zero time practicing the tactics and learning how to conduct yourself in the shoot house. So that's also not a good option. And then finally, for, bookworm tactical genius guy, that's real nice until no one wants to go in the shoot house with you because you have no muzzle discipline and you can't hit target for shit because you didn't spend any time at the range. These are obviously like hyperbolic examples meant to illustrate my point, but really it's just some Goldilocks shit. You don't want to be too hot or too cold in any area. You want to be just right in every single area. So, going back to our piece of the pie idea, the just right, like we said, Goldilocks, is kind of the concept that we're getting at. Think of like your operator skill set as the whole pie. And shooting, PT, tactics, they're all single pieces of that pie. You can't have pieces missing or you won't be a whole pie. You won't have the requisite skill set to complete the job that you need to do. So if I spend, 50% of my time doing shooting and 50% of my time doing PT, well, I still have a big old hole over there in the tactics side. So you got to make sure that you divert or you commit the necessary time to each skill set so that you can get to that just right area so you can be pretty good at a bunch of different stuff. So now that we have the whole piece of the pie thing clear like mud, let's go ahead and move on to the micro application. Let's go ahead and switch gears away from the tactical area to another one of my favorites, jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu, like tactics or shooting, is just another piece of any requisite pie, But within jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu piece of the pie, there are pieces of pie that make up that piece of the pie. It's a mindfuck, I know. But each single piece of pie can be its own pie. And within that piece of pie, you're going to have different areas that you need to work on. So let's break it down on the micro level. There are a bunch of ways, to break jiu-jitsu down into smaller parts. There's standing technique and ground technique. Within standing techniques, there are throws, foot sweeps, takedowns. Within ground techniques, there's top game and bottom game. Within top game, there's passes, pins, submissions. Within bottom game, there's guards, sweeps, reversals, submissions. Point being, the jiu-jitsu pond is really as deep as you want to take it. And what do you know? We're back to pieces of the pie, Let's say, for the sake of simplicity, just assume we're all professional jiu-jitsu competitors and we can devote all of our time to jiu-jitsu. There's so many areas that one can focus on in jiu-jitsu, as I mentioned. You can decide that you like sweeps. You want to be the sweep guy. You proceed to spend all of your time learning all the sweeps you can. You look in YouTube, you get instructionals, you learn them in class, you talk to the upper belts, and then you get the nickname Sweep Guy. So now that you're Sweep Guy, all these super awesome sweeps, you're ready to take this to the next level. So you show up to the open mat. You pick a partner, you start the timer, you slap bump, proceed to roll. It's sweeping time. It's not long before you realize that you don't know any guards that would put you in a position to set up your sweep plans. So you immediately get past the side control. And you don't know any side control escapes. Obviously, because you spent all your time on sweeps. So now you're stuck in side control. Your opponent moves to mount, begins to set up an armbar. Again, unfortunately, you don't know any mount or armbar defenses or escapes, so you just remain stuck until you get submitted. You check the round timer and realize that it's been only about 15 seconds, and you realize you got about 4 minutes and 45 seconds left to go. This is not going to be fun for you. Hopefully, what you're realizing through that example is that everything is really interconnected, and you can't succeed by only focusing on the things that you think are the coolest. Jiu-jitsu, like life, requires answers and solutions to a vast amount of questions and problems. You can't win a jiu-jitsu roll with just sweeps or just passes or just submissions. Not only are all these positions connected to the point that each one sets up the other, but there's no guarantee that you're going to find yourself in that single situation that you like to work on. Here's a better plan. Learn 3 techniques for each position. Get pretty good at those three techniques for each position. Now that you have 3 answers to any question that you could possibly be asked, I can guarantee at least one of those 3 answers is going to be successful. And guess what? By the time you probably get those 3 techniques for each position, you're probably a purple belt, which means you could submit more or less 95% of people on the planet. So look, you invested 2 to 3 nights a week for a few years, which is roughly 15 to 20% of your time, and now you're in the top 20% when it comes to whooping ass. And we've come full circle. Did you see what I did there? All right, enough about the micro stuff. Let's go ahead and finish things up, and we'll get to the macros because I got shit to do today. So at this point, we're going back to our whole microscope metaphor that we've been zooming in. We've been zooming in on all these individual areas, shooting, jiu-jitsu, whatever. We're going to go zooming out now. And so again, jiu-jitsu specifically, right? So we're zoomed in on jiu-jitsu. Let's zoom out. Now we're looking at combatives, right? Jiu-jitsu, while it can be an all-inclusive, empty-hand combative solution, it doesn't cover blade work or shooting or medical or emergency medicine, like tourniquets or stop the bleed or CPR, So jiu-jitsu, again, we're zoomed in, but that's only one piece, right? And if you spend all your time on jiu-jitsu, look at all these other things that fall onto the wayside in just the realm of combatives, right? So you zoom out even more. Combatives is one piece of the preparedness pie. It's not covering storing or growing food or security or financials or communications or vehicles. Nothing. You know what I mean? It's just covering that one piece of the pie. Now you zoom out even more, and now you're looking at the whole concept, the whole person. You're a husband or a wife, a mother or a father. You're a professional. You're looking at the whole person, all these responsibilities that you have. As me, Brian, I'm looking at. I don't get to just devote my entire life to being Batman, though that would be cool. I have to go to work. I have to clean my house. Sometimes I clean my house. Anyway. But again, we're looking, if we zoom out, right? It's important to keep these things in perspective, because what happens, I think, is you get people that get so focused on one little thing. They're like, oh man, I'm going to be Batman. And then they're like, oh man, I got fired because I forgot I had work on Monday because I was busy at shooting my guns at the range, And you're like, well, that's just not an effective way to live your life. You're devoting way too much time to that one thing, right? And this other area of your life requires attention too. And it's really easy for the fun things like shooting and jiu-jitsu and all these other things to really consume your whole being, and you got to be able to zoom out, look at the big picture, make sure that me, Brian, in the circumstances that we live in, because guess what? It's entirely more likely that I'm going to have to pay my mortgage next month than it is that I'm going to have to go stack bodies in the zombie revolution. That's just how things are. And for me to spend 80% of my time worrying about the contingencies that probably most likely are not going to be even an issue next month is just not an efficient, it's a poor use of your time. So anyway, it's like, again, going back to, and this really applies, it's not just to fun stuff, right? Balance is what's key here, being balanced. If you're working an 80-hour week and you're not spending any time with your family, you need to take a step back and reevaluate how you're spending your time. And now, obviously, there's going to be times and periods that come and go where one area must become the focus, and the other areas, they're going to have to be put on the back burner. But it's when one area is constantly taking the required focus away from other areas that it becomes a problem. If you're working 80-hour weeks, week after week after week, and hey, at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do to pay bills. But, if you're not sitting there at least taking some kind of evaluation where you're saying, okay, do I really need to work 80 hours a week, or is there another way that I can achieve this same end, right? Or maybe, hey, if you're working or you're living a life that requires an 80-hour week, maybe you need to cut some money somewhere, or maybe you need to rethink your financials and how you're spending money. Again, it all comes down to that evaluation, and not putting all your time into one thing. But again, balance is the key, and it can be anything. Too much time at work, too much time with your family, too much time, sitting on the couch watching TV, playing video games, too much time on the computer, too much time, at the bar, drinking beer, sitting on the porch doing nothing. Anyway, finding the balance and looking at the big picture to make sure that our goals in life, are essentially our roadmap, that we're following that we've got the ship steered in the direction that we know we need to be going, make sure we haven't gone off track. And on that same token, though, you will inevitably find things that are repeatedly falling to the wayside. And when you see that, you really need to start reevaluating your priorities. If you've made commitments to say, I want to, do jiu-jitsu. Again, I want to learn jiu-jitsu. That's a priority to me. And then you're constantly not going to train because it's somebody's birthday party, or you're not going to train because, your mother-in-law's in town for dinner, or, I got to work late, or, I got to whatever, hey, maybe it's just not quite the priority that you thought it was. It's a lot easier to say I want to do jiu-jitsu than it is to actually follow through and invest the time and the effort that it takes to get jiu-jitsu or anything, And for those of you who know me, I like to say, don't tell me you don't have time, tell me it's not a priority. And every single one of us will make time for the things that we want to do. If I want to jiu-jitsu, if I want to do jiu-jitsu, I'm going to find time, and I do, because it's a priority to me. But, sometimes vacuuming the floors is not really a priority to me, because, I always I could, vacuum the floor, or I could do literally anything else. Anyway, but just remember that's a saying that I like. Don't say you don't have time, say it's not a priority. And with that, let's go ahead and leave it there for today. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen to me run my suck. I appreciate it. I hope you got something out of it that made it worth your time. And go do something hard today. Watch out for the crazies, and we'll catch you in the next one.
You're listening to the FM Podcast.